I'm pleased to be here today to talk to you about conservative perspectives on foreign policy and national security. Now, I don't mean this to be the definitive history. It's an introduction to a topic I hope you'll want to know a lot more about. I'm going to argue there are a number of basic principles on which conservatives agree, though to be sure, there are also areas of debate. And that's not unhealthy. Conservatives are not dogmatists. Times and circumstances change. Foreign policy dilemmas may look alike, but upon examination, they can turn out to be very different. So let's begin at the beginning, with America's first national security crisis, the one faced by the nation's founders, one which I'm going to argue substantially shaped conservative thinking to this very day. And I want to give credit where credit is due. I'm going to draw heavily on historian Michael Oren's marvelous book, Power, Faith, and Fantasy, which I strongly recommend you all read. Now, in 1776, America declared its independence. That much you knew. What you may not have considered, independence meant that the new United States would no longer be protected by the British Navy, and America had no navy of her own. Foreign forces were not attacking our shores. Some may have been tempted already. But we were a trading nation. We had vital commercial relationships with the nations of Europe, and that meant our ships plied the Eastern Atlantic and the Mediterranean. And in those waters were what we call the Barbary pirates. They called themselves Mujahideen, Islamic warriors. They preyed on Western ships, Western merchant ships. They impounded vessels, they stole cargoes, and they would take crews and sell them in North Africa's slave markets. They sailed from Morocco, an independent empire, and from Tripoli, Tunis, and Algiers, which were regencies of the Ottoman Empire, which, by the way, also was an Islamic caliphate. This area was known in Arabic as the Maghreb, which means the West, because it was west of Arabia. And it was Muslim armies from Arabia that had invaded and conquered the region about 1,000 years earlier, beginning in the 7th century. Westerners had a different name for the region. We called it the Barbary Coast. Not only were American ships defenseless, but unlike Europe, the U.S. couldn't really afford to pay big ransoms or tribute in exchange for protection. We weren't that rich. In 1784, Moroccan pirates seized the Boston brig Betsy off the North African coast. The crew was captured, locked in the hold, and sent to Morocco's slave markets. Over the next 3 months, 2 more American ships were abducted. As Michael Oren recounts, 21 American crewmen were fettered and paraded past jeering crowds to the court of the dynastic sovereign or Dey Hassa, who allegedly spat at them, "Now I have got you, you Christian dogs, you shall eat stones." The slightest resistance was punishable by bastinado, which means beatings on the feet, or beheading, or impalement on iron spikes, actually. Thomas Jefferson was distressed. In this, as in other matters, he was not enthusiastic about the European approach. He argued that America should not pay ransoms or tribute, should not attempt appeasement, but should rather confront the Barbary states with power. He said the states must see the rod. Perhaps it must be felt by some of them. What's particularly interesting here, from a conservative perspective, Jefferson had long opposed the establishment of an American Navy. He was wary about the growth of government. But in this instance, he made an exception. He said, we ought to begin a naval power if we mean to carry our own commerce. And he added that he believed Americans would rather, quote, raise ships and men to fight the pirates into reason than money to bribe them. He came to the conclusion, and a conservative conclusion, I would argue, that American foreign policy should have, and I'm quoting again here, an erect and independent attitude. He understood that it would require such an attitude to send a message to other potential adversaries. He said, it will procure us respect in Europe, and respect, he said, is a safeguard to interest. What happened next disappointed Jefferson. Congress refused to allocate the $2 million needed to build a fleet of 150 guns. Instead, representatives allotted $70,000 to buy off the pirates. And John Adams, who was then America's minister to Britain, said the young nation could not fight the Barbary states, quote, at least unless we determined to fight them forever, a task he feared was, quote, too rugged for our people to bear. So Jefferson joined Adams in London, and together they tried to find a diplomatic solution. But Abd al-Rahman al-Ajjar, the personal representative of the Pasha of Tripoli, was not interested in compromise, or what we nowadays call conflict resolution. He told them, and I'm quoting again, "It was written in the Quran that all nations who should not have acknowledged the Muslims' authority were sinners, and that it was their right and duty to make war upon whoever they could find and to make slaves of all they could take prisoners, and that every Mussulman," which is a word for Muslims back then, "who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise." Well, that changed Adams' thinking, and it reinforced Jefferson in his conviction that Americans would have to take up arms, that peace with Barbary was possible only, quote, through the medium of war. Congress still would not go along. The Barbary pirates continued to prey on American ships, and gifts were paid for their release. George Washington weighed in. He said he felt, quote, the highest disgrace in seeing America become tributary to such banditti who might for half the sum that is paid them be exterminated from the earth. Would to heaven, he said, we had a navy to reform those enemies to mankind or crush them into non-existence. He told this to his friend, the Marquis de Lafayette of France. At the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Washington's views were endorsed by James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. In what became the Federalist Papers, Hamilton wrote, "If we mean to be a commercial people, we must endeavor, as soon as possible, to have a navy." The Constitution, officially adopted on March 4th, 1789, empowered Congress to provide and maintain a navy. As Orrin puts it, a threat from the Middle East had played a concrete role in creating a truly united States, a consolidated nation capable of defending not only its borders at home, but its vital economic interests abroad. Over the years that followed, that Navy would be slow to become effective. More American ships would be seized. More American sailors would be shackled and sold into slavery or offered back in exchange for ransom. By the end of the century, the problem remained unresolved. It was not until 1815, with James Madison as the new American president, that Stephen Decatur, the son of a U.S. naval officer who had served during the American Revolution, received instructions to inflict, quote, serious disasters on the rulers of North Africa and achieve through the use of power a just and lasting peace. On the morning of June 28th, 10 American warships, at the time the largest U.S. fleet ever assembled, sailed into Algiers harbor. Omar Pasha, Algiers' new Dey, was instructed, not asked, to unconditionally release all American captives and pay an indemnity. It was made clear that if he hesitated, his entire city would be razed to the ground. The Pasha appealed to President Madison, addressing him as the Emperor of America for better terms. President Madison replied that the United States, while they wish for war with no nation, will buy peace with none. America's terms were accepted. Decatur then sailed on to Tunis and Tripoli, where he also employed what would become known as gunboat diplomacy. So concluded more than 3 decades of struggle between the United States and North Africa, Orrin writes, the pirates of Barbary, who had captured a total of 35 American vessels and 700 sailors, and who had threatened America's survival and tarnished its pride, were crushed.